Stray dog protects baby from a cobra. What happened next will leave you speechless. The air was thick with silence, the kind that fills the twilight hour when the world hangs between day and night. A faint rustle of leaves whispered through the forest as if nature itself held its breath. The jungle floor was a patchwork of damp soil and tangled roots, dappled by the fading sunlight slipping through the dense canopy above. Beneath this fading light, a solitary figure toddled through the underbrush. A child, barely 2 years old, his small hands clutching a worn blanket. His face was smeared with dirt and tears, his dark eyes wide with fear. This was Ariv, a baby abandoned in the wild, his cries swallowed by the vastness of the jungle. Unaware of the dangers around him, the boy staggered forward, each step a tiny battle against exhaustion. He stumbled and fell, his cries breaking the quiet. The sound rippled through the trees, a sharp note of vulnerability in a symphony of distant rustles and chirps. And then, a new sound emerged, soft at first, like dry leaves dragging across the ground. But it grew louder, deliberate, and menacing. The child froze, his small chest rising and falling rapidly as he turned toward the source of the noise. From the shadows, a snake emerged. Its sleek, sinuous body shimmered with copper and black, its hood flaring wide in warning. A king cobra, apex predator of the forest, fixed its unblinking eyes on the child. The reptile slithered forward, each movement a study in lethal precision, its forked tongue flicking the air as it closed the distance. Ariv's cries grew louder, frantic, cutting through the thick stillness like a siren. But in this vast jungle, who would hear? Who would save him? The cobra coiled, its body winding into a tight spiral, ready to strike. The moment seemed frozen, as if time itself held still. And then, a sudden growl shattered the air. From the shadows, a figure leaped into the clearing. It was a dog, a stray, its fur matted and streaked with mud, but its eyes burning with determination. The dog positioned itself between the cobra and the child, its body low, teeth bared, and a deep growl rumbling from its throat. The cobra hesitated, its head swaying in hypnotic arcs as it sized up this unexpected challenger. The dog didn't flinch. Its growls grew louder, more ferocious, as it took a step closer, shielding Ariv with its own body. The two creatures locked in a deadly standoff, one armed with venom, the other with sheer courage. The jungle seemed to hold its breath once more, the tension thick as the impending strike hung in the air. In that instant, the jungle's vastness no longer felt indifferent. It was alive, electric, a stage for this unfolding drama. Would courage triumph over instinct? Would the bond between human and animal, forged in the fires of desperation, prove stronger than the primal forces of survival? And as the cobra reared higher, preparing to strike, the dog lunged. The story of Ariv, the abandoned child, began in a quiet village nestled at the edge of the jungle. Life there was simple but fragile, like the cracked clay walls of the small huts that dotted the landscape. Ariv's parents, workers on a nearby plantation, had struggled for years to make ends meet. When a violent storm destroyed their home and crops, they decided to seek work in the city, leaving Ariv with a distant relative who barely had the means or the willingness to care for him. Days turned into weeks, and the relative's patience waned. One morning, with no explanation, Ariv was left in the jungle on the pretense of a short walk. A moment of neglect became a tragedy as the toddler was left alone, surrounded by the vast, indifferent wilderness. The relative never returned. In a different corner of the jungle, another story unfolded. A tale of survival, heartbreak, and resilience. The stray dog, later called Shiro by the villagers, had once belonged to a family that lived on the outskirts of the jungle. Shiro had been a loyal companion, guarding their small home and playing with the children. But life for the family was hard. When a drought ravaged the region, forcing them to leave in search of better opportunities, they made the heart-wrenching decision to abandon Shiro, believing he could survive on his own. Days of waiting near the empty house turned into weeks, and Shiro finally wandered into the jungle, searching for food and shelter. Surviving as a stray in the wilderness was no easy feat. Shiro learned to navigate the perils of the jungle, from sneaky predators to scarce resources. His once shiny coat became ragged, his ribs visible beneath his matted fur. But through it all, Shiro held on to the instincts of loyalty and protection ingrained in him. Though he faced his own battles, Shiro often lingered near the edge of the jungle, drawn by the faint sounds of human life from the village. He had seen abandoned livestock, stray goats, and even children wander too close to the wilderness, and each time, his protective instincts surfaced. Shiro had no family anymore, but his heart still clung to the idea of belonging. And so, when Shiro heard Ariv's faint cries that evening, something inside him stirred. The sound was unmistakable, fear and vulnerability wrapped in the small, broken voice of a child. He tracked the sound, his ears pricking up and nose twitching as he wove through the tangled underbrush. For Ariv, the jungle was a maze of towering trees and eerie sounds, but for Shiro, it was a battlefield he had navigated many times before. And as the dog approached the scene, his sharp eyes caught the gleaming scales of the cobra, its form illuminated by the last streaks of dying sunlight. It was here, in the heart of the wilderness, that two abandoned souls met, a child cast out by neglect, and a dog left behind by love. Both had suffered the harshness of the world, but what neither knew yet was how profoundly they would change each other's lives. Shiro didn't know Ariv's name, nor did Ariv understand the sacrifices Shiro had made to reach him. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What tied them together was a shared fragility, an unspoken bond that transcended words. As Shiro growled at the cobra, he wasn't just defending a helpless child. He was defending the part of himself that still believed in love, loyalty, and the chance to protect someone who needed him. And for Ariv, though too young to comprehend, the sight of Shiro standing firm against the snake would become the defining image of his fragile childhood. A moment that proved even in the darkest places, courage and kindness could shine. The jungle had cast them both aside, but together, they were about to create a story that would defy its cruelty. The cobra reared higher, its hood fully flared, and its eyes glinted like polished obsidian in the dim light. The faint hiss it emitted was a warning, a declaration of its dominance. Shiro, however, didn't retreat. His growls were low and steady, his body positioned between the snake and the trembling child. The jungle had shaped him into a survivor, but this moment wasn't about survival. It was about protection. Ariv sat frozen, his tiny hands clutching the edge of his blanket. His sobs had quieted, replaced by wide-eyed terror. In his limited understanding, he didn't grasp the danger fully, but he sensed the tension. Shiro turned his head briefly, his intelligent eyes meeting Ariv's, as if silently reassuring the child. "Stay still. I've got this." The cobra struck first, its sleek body snapping forward with the speed of a whip. Shiro dodged, leaping sideways, his jaws snapping in response. The cobra recoiled, retreating slightly, but it wasn't giving up. This was its territory, and Shiro was an intruder. The standoff grew more intense, the snake lunging again and again, each strike narrowly missing as Shiro danced around it, barking and growling with ferocious determination. Ariv flinched at each clash, his small frame trembling with every bark and hiss that echoed through the clearing. Shiro knew he couldn't outlast the snake. The cobra was faster and armed with deadly venom. But Shiro's focus wasn't on victory. It was on buying enough time. Time for the child to be safe. Time to outwit the predator. In a desperate move, Shiro lunged forward, snapping his jaws at the cobra's tail. He didn't aim to kill. He only needed to frighten it, to make it reconsider its hunt. The cobra hissed louder, its body weaving an intricate dance of threat and precision. But Shiro stood his ground, his barks echoing with a primal warning that carried deep into the jungle. It was then that something extraordinary happened. The sounds of Shiro's barks drew the attention of a small group of langurs perched in a nearby tree. The gray monkeys chattered, their black faces tilted toward the scene below. Shiro's defiance seemed to inspire them. One langur leapt to a lower branch, baring its teeth at the cobra and adding its voice to Shiro's growls. Then another joined, and another, until a chorus of chattering, screeching monkeys surrounded the clearing. The cobra hesitated. Its primal instincts recognized the growing threat. While one dog might be manageable, a noisy troop of monkeys was another matter entirely. The snake uncoiled slightly, its hood lowering as it reevaluated its position. Shiro seized the moment. He barked louder, advancing a step, his body tense and ready to lunge again if needed. The monkeys added to the chaos, shaking branches and dropping small sticks in the snake's direction. Overwhelmed by the combined force of noise and intimidation, the cobra retreated, slithering back into the underbrush with one last defiant hiss. The clearing fell silent. Shiro stood motionless, his chest heaving from exertion. His ears pricked as he listened for any sign of the cobra's return. The langurs watched from above, their chatter softening to murmurs before they disappeared back into the treetops. Ariv whimpered softly, his wide eyes still glued to Shiro. The dog turned and stepped toward the child, his posture softening. Slowly, he lowered himself to the ground, wagging his tail slightly as if to say, "It's over now. You're safe." The child crawled toward Shiro, his tiny hands reaching out tentatively. Shiro didn't move, allowing the boy to press his small body against the dog's side. Ariv buried his face in Shiro's fur, his sobs returning, not from fear this time but from the overwhelming relief of safety. The two sat there in the fading light, an unlikely pair bound by a shared moment of courage and survival. Shiro licked the boy's face gently, his soft whines a stark contrast to the growls he had unleashed moments earlier. For the first time in what felt like forever, Shiro felt a flicker of purpose. Not just survival, but connection. Unbeknownst to either of them, the jungle had taken notice. Birds resumed their songs, insects buzzed softly in the background, and the rustling leaves seemed to whisper their approval. Two lost souls had found each other in the heart of the wilderness, and the bond they formed in that clearing would grow stronger with every step of their journey. But this was only the beginning. Darkness was closing in, and the jungle's dangers were far from over. Shiro and Ariv would need each other more than ever in the trials to come. Night had fallen over the jungle, transforming it into a world of shadows and whispers. The thick canopy above allowed only slivers of moonlight to pierce through, casting ghostly beams onto the forest floor. The air was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. Chirps, howls, and rustling leaves created an orchestra of mystery and tension. Shiro stayed close to Ariv, his protective instincts on high alert. The child clung to the dog's neck, his tiny hands gripping the matted fur as though it were a lifeline. Every crack of a twig or distant growl sent a shiver through the boy, but Shiro remained steady, a solid presence against the wild chaos of the night. The pair needed shelter. The jungle at night was no place for the vulnerable, a fact Shiro knew instinctively. With a soft whine, he nudged Ariv to his feet, encouraging the child to follow. The boy wobbled but trusted the dog, stumbling after him as Shiro led the way through the tangled underbrush. Their journey was fraught with challenges. At one point, a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the distance, low to the ground and creeping closer. Shiro stopped abruptly, his body tense and his growl deep. The predator, a leopard, studied them from the shadows, its powerful frame coiled like a spring. Ariv whimpered softly, clutching Shiro's fur in fear, but the dog refused to back down. Planting himself firmly in front of Ariv, Shiro bared his teeth and growled, a low and menacing sound that echoed through the clearing. The leopard hesitated, its muscles twitching as it debated the risk of confrontation. After what felt like an eternity, the big cat slinked away into the darkness, its glowing eyes disappearing like embers snuffed out by the night. It was in moments like this that their bond deepened. Ariv began to understand, even in his young mind, that this dog was not just a protector but a companion. He reached out to touch Shiro's face, his small fingers brushing against the dog's nose. Shiro responded with a gentle lick, his warm tongue a balm to the child's frayed nerves. Hours passed as they navigated the treacherous terrain. The jungle seemed endless, an unforgiving maze of roots and shadows. But finally, They stumbled upon a small hollow beneath the roots of a massive tree. It wasn't much, but it offered a semblance of safety. A place to rest, hidden from prying eyes and the dangers of the night. Shiro settled down first, curling his body around Ariv like a living shield. The child snuggled against him, his head resting on the dog's side. For the first time since their encounter, Ariv's sobs quieted, his breathing evening out as he drifted into an exhausted sleep. Shiro stayed awake, his ears twitching at every sound. The jungle was restless, but his mission was clear: protect the boy at all costs. He had nothing left to lose, no family, no home. But in this fragile child, Shiro had found a purpose. As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, painting the world in hues of gold and green. Ariv stirred, rubbing his eyes as he awoke to the sight of Shiro watching over him. The boy's face lit up with a small, hesitant smile, the first sign of trust. But their bond was tested once more before the day ended. As they wandered in search of food and water, Ariv tripped over a root, tumbling to the ground with a cry. His knee was scraped, blood welling up in a small but painful wound. The child wailed, his cries echoing through the jungle. Shiro rushed to his side, sniffing the wound carefully before licking it clean. It wasn't much, but the act soothed Ariv, who wrapped his arms around the dog's neck in gratitude. For a moment, their pain and fear faded, replaced by a profound connection that transcended words. But the jungle was never truly safe. A sudden rustle in the underbrush sent Shiro into high alert. From the shadows emerged a pack of wild dogs, their eyes hungry and their bodies lean with desperation. They circled the pair, their growls low and menacing. Shiro placed himself between Ariv and the pack, his fur bristling and his teeth bared. The pack leader lunged first, aiming for Shiro's throat. But Shiro met the attack head-on, dodging the bite and countering with a powerful snap of his jaws. The battle was fierce and chaotic, a blur of fur and teeth. Shiro fought with everything he had, his only thought to keep Ariv safe. The child watched in terror, tears streaming down his face as his guardian battled against overwhelming odds. Just when it seemed the pack might overpower him, a new sound cut through the chaos: the sharp, rhythmic beat of a stick against the ground. Emerging from the shadows was a group of villagers, drawn by the commotion. They carried torches and tools, shouting and waving to scare off the wild dogs. The pack hesitated, their courage faltering in the face of the human presence. One by one, they retreated into the jungle, leaving Shiro bloodied but victorious. Ariv ran to the dog, throwing his arms around him as the villagers approached. One man stepped forward, his eyes widening in shock as he recognized the child. "Ariv!" he exclaimed, scooping the boy into his arms. The villagers marveled at the dog who had protected the boy so fiercely. "This dog saved his life," one woman whispered, her voice filled with awe. Shiro stood silently, his body weary but his eyes watchful. As Ariv clung to the man carrying him, he looked back at Shiro, his small hand reaching out toward the dog. In that moment, Shiro realized something profound. He wasn't just a stray anymore. He had found a family, a purpose, and a bond that would last forever. The morning sun bathed the small village in warm, golden light. The air buzzed with activity as news of Ariv's miraculous rescue spread like wildfire. Crowds gathered outside his family's modest home, eager to glimpse the boy and his unlikely savior. Shiro sat quietly on the porch, his ears perked but his posture calm. He had been cleaned up and bandaged by the villagers, though his wounds from the fight with the wild dogs still stung. Despite the pain, his eyes remained fixed on the door, waiting for Ariv. Inside, the boy rested in his mother's arms, his small face still pale from the ordeal. His father stood nearby, recounting the story to the gathered neighbors. "That dog saved my son's life," he said, his voice trembling with gratitude. Without him, Ariv wouldn't be here today. Shiro's presence in the village was met with mixed reactions at first. Some saw him as a hero, while others were wary of the stray, fearing his wild instincts. But Ariv's unwavering affection for the dog quickly began to change hearts. The boy refused to leave Shiro's side, even dragging a blanket outside to sit with him on the porch. Days turned into weeks, and Shiro became a fixture in the village. Ariv's parents, once hesitant, accepted the dog into their home. They even gave him a proper name, Rakshak, meaning protector. It seemed fitting for the dog who had risked his life to save their son. But the story didn't end there. Ariv's father, a teacher in the village school, saw an opportunity to share a powerful message with his community. This dog didn't know Ariv, he told the gathered villagers during a meeting. Yet he protected him with everything he had. If an animal can show such compassion, why can't we? The tale of Shiro, or Rakshak, became a symbol of unity and kindness in the village. Inspired by the dog's courage, the villagers began initiatives to care for the stray animals in their area. A small shelter was built at the edge of the village, offering food and safety to dogs and other animals in need. Ariv and Shiro grew inseparable. The boy, once shy and fearful, blossomed into a confident child, always accompanied by his loyal protector. Together, they explored the fields and forests surrounding the village, their bond deepening with every shared adventure. One day, as Ariv and Shiro sat by the riverbank, the boy's father approached, holding a small notebook. "Ariv," he said, kneeling beside his son, "I've been writing down your story. The world needs to know what happened, how Shiro saved you." The boy looked at Shiro, his small hand resting on the dog's head. "He's not just my hero," Ariv said softly. "He's my best friend." The story spread far beyond the village. A journalist from the nearby city picked it up, publishing an article that quickly went viral. Soon, people from across the region flocked to the village to meet Shiro, the heroic stray who had protected a child from the dangers of the wild. Donations poured in for the village's animal shelter, allowing it to expand and provide care for even more animals. Shiro's story became a beacon of hope, proving that even the most unlikely heroes could inspire change. Years later, Ariv, now a young man, stood in front of a large crowd at an event dedicated to animal welfare. Shiro, his muzzle now grayed with age, sat at his side, still as devoted as ever. "This dog taught me what it means to be brave," Ariv said, his voice filled with emotion. "He showed me that love and loyalty know no boundaries, and that even in the darkest moments, there is light to be found." As the crowd erupted in applause, Ariv knelt to embrace Shiro, his lifelong companion and protector. The bond they had formed in the heart of the jungle had not only saved their lives but had also inspired countless others to see the world, and the creatures within it, with compassion and respect. In the end, Shiro wasn't just a stray dog. He was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the smallest acts of courage could ripple outward, changing lives and building bridges between humans and the animals who share their world. And though his story would one day become legend, for Ariv, Shiro would always be simply his savior, his friend, and his family.